All right, Dan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm afraid there is really only one place to start with this.
Of course.
Which is the letter. Now,
Yes.
yesterday at Hustings, for those who weren't there, you were asked about the rumours that you had authored it, and you said that you had. You also said that you do stand by some of the points you raised in it.
I do.
Obviously, that arena is not always the best one to make yourself clear, so I want to give you another opportunity now to say which points you specifically stand by in what you wrote.
Specifically, I believe I raised a few points in it, and one of them, which I believe was quite important, was the AGM, which I highlighted in the article. Specifically, the restructure of the union. Now, myself and other students, both before, during and after the AGM, voiced our concerns regarding some proposals, and I wasn't too bothered about, I am bothered, but I wasn't too concerned with the way that it was passed. I was more concerned with the way the union and the executive officers reacted to it. So,
you don't think you maybe undermined your point a little bit by, well, first of all, doing it anonymously, but also obviously some of the choice language which you did say was in jest and didn't quite come across.
I did speak with Oliver regarding the letter, and I did say that some of the humour which I used did miss the mark, and that's entirely...
And have you spoken to Stefan, obviously, who's running as Vice President? You may find yourself on the same executive team as him next year.
I have spoken to Stefan.
You haven't? You
don't
think you've jeopardised your relationship?
No, I mean, if anything comes up, I think we're both reasonable enough to come to some sort of resolution regarding it. But in terms of undermining my point, I don't think so. I think keeping it anonymous, well, for me, I decided that keeping it anonymous was the best way forward.
Well, I suppose if you are going to describe them as impotent and incompetent and unprofessional, maybe, yeah. Although
that wasn't the main reason. The main reason was because I realised that if I put a name to it, then most of the focus of the reaction would be on, oh, why did you write this? How could you say that?
Just for the sake of clarity, I mean, obviously, you wrote this presumably before you decided to run for president.
I wrote this when I was not considering.
Okay. When did you decide first to run? I mean, because that's not too long ago, so
no,
it's a fairly recent decision.
I believe the article came out a substantial amount of days before the nominations opened, even before the posters were put up regarding the advertisement for the role. And when I realised, once the article had been released and people were saying, you know, this article, while it could have been written slightly better, which I agree with, the issues it raised, we also agree with. So
one of those issues highlighted in it, and probably moved toward your manifesto, is you describe the union quite specifically as presenting itself at least as a waste of time, a waste of space, and a waste of money, and that seems to imply that it's an unnecessary exercise. So I'm interested to find out why it is that you're running there. I mean, if you think the union is pointless anyway, why run for it?
The language was a little strong. However, I do believe that certain aspects of the union this year can be developed upon to develop it to its full potential. So, for example, I know Oliver this year has been very, very active in terms of representing individual students in individual cases, so for plagiarism cases.
So it wasn't the case. It was in jest when you said in the letter that the current executive has been largely ignorant of students and their interests.
To a large degree, yes. However, there are certain areas which any union will fall down upon, and one of these, I believe, was listening to the student views as a whole, and listening to, particularly with regards to the Roehampton partnership. So if one draws a comparison to last year with the St Mary's partnership, then the details, as much as they could be, were revealed to the students. There were referendums, and there were meetings, and there were talks on it.
So you think actually this year has been less clear than that?
In terms of asking the students what they want to see and what they want the union to think about, what stance they want the union to take.
Because I mean, that's not the position that your opponent Henry takes. I mean, he made the point in Hustings that actually there's been more correspondence between the college's staff and the people responsible for negotiation than there was during the St Mary's thing.
I think the college did learn from the St Mary's discussions in terms of how to conduct.
The college did, but the union did not.
My main point is that the union, I believe, has some way to go in consulting the students in terms of where the students want the partnership to go and what the views are. Because last year, the Safe Heathrow Society came about, there were protests in the common room in the library. Whereas this year, my platform...
Acceptance that the fate is sealed, surely.
Yes, and the two referendums coming with two different results, of course. But this year, I think my platform consists of asking the students what they want to see from the union and then factoring that into the union's position.
Isn't that, though, just really the job description? I mean, what you're essentially saying there is, by implication, that Ollie has not fulfilled the role as described.
Yeah,
and it's the job of the president to listen to the students.
Yeah, and this came up in Hastings. Surely this is just not part and parcel of the president's role. Well, yes, I do believe it is, but for some people, it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget how important the students are to the students' union. So I'm offering a solid commitment. So for example, my
which has been lacking, and you think?
I do think so in certain aspects, which are not necessarily as important this year as they will be next year, because next year decisions will be made, concrete ideas will be proposed, and where he thought going metaphorically and physically will.
Well, that's going to be something we're going to come back to, if that's right. The groundwork being laid for the kind of the afterlife. Now you mentioned already the AGM, the structural changes that were passed there, and it's something you were critical of in your letter, in the words you've written for the Lion under your own name, and in your manifesto as well, I believe. But having trawled through that, I haven't seen any suggestion of an alternative. So,
of a restructure?
Yeah, I mean, or any improvements you would make. So it's fine, it's all right to say that you don't agree with either it or the way it was passed, but then surely it's incumbent upon you as a presidential candidate to offer an alternative which is better.
My points in the letter and the 300 words and my manifesto were not necessarily that the restructure was a bad thing. I just think that the way that it was presented to the students feedback was gathered, and the way that it was passed could have been developed better.
Right.
So asking the students whether the restructure was a good idea, holding focus groups, asking students what they thought.
Because they did ask, obviously, the point of an AGM is that is when these are proposed. Now, because you can have all kinds of problems, if you like, with the content of the motion as passed and the way it was passed. But you were talking earlier again about the importance of representing the students, and a large number of students at that AGM made explicit their concerns that the restructure will actually diminish their representation and will diminish, for example, the lack of dedicated welfare officers. So it seems to me that you can't really have it both ways. I mean, either you're in favour of representing the students and listening to them, or you're not. And given that a large number of students have disagreed with this, then surely if you're listening to them, you will find an alternative.
Yeah, I believe that perhaps, obviously time issues were a factor in their offering the motion when they did at the AGM, but I do believe that certain students might have been considering running for, say, welfare officer, or running for publicity officer, any kind of role. But then when the union restructure happened, and now they're just general executive officer roles, people might have thought, oh, well, if it's not going to be solely welfare, I don't want to do it. So I think maybe offering somewhat of a more specific job role than they did would have encouraged more people to come on board.
But again, I mean, I have to go back to the point about an alternative. I mean, these seem to me to be perfectly valid points, but if that's your belief, then why is it that your only criticism is of the way the motion was introduced? If you accept that there are problems with it, then surely you've got to look to change it. I mean, would you look to reintroduce more specified roles for welfare, for example?
That would depend on the nature of those who apply for the roles. So I was asked yesterday if I didn't win, would I run for executive officer? And I said I would.
Well, obviously you did just say that the changes might put off people.
They did, I did.
So if that's, again,
I know what you mean.
Trying to have it both ways. If they've already been put off, then how can you wait to see if they put themselves forward?
I understand. It's what I was trying to say was if people run for their roles, then I like to think they would be motivated to run because they want to help the union, whichever form they can. And then my increasing the specificity of the roles would be sitting down with them and asking them which aspects of the union would you like to assist with the most. So if we had 4 events officers, then we'd have to obviously ask them to do extra things. But if we found that we had a myriad of skills that we'd applied for, these highly motivated individuals, and I hope would come forward.
But that was always the intention of the motion, though, anyway. So
my personal view on the motion is that at the time, and going forward into next year, it was perhaps one of the best things they could have done.
Okay.
However, I do think that the way that they expected us to sort of sit there and within the space of 20 minutes deliberate, decide, and vote on the motion.
Finally, for clarity, you don't have a problem with the content of the motion?
The content of the motion, I think, was, at the time, the best option. But going forward next year, I would like to make sure that those who do run and those who are on to win the union do get the chance to have the specificity that they missed out on by the restructure of the union. So finding sort of a middle ground between what
so
was
you'll row back from it slowly, rather than...
Yeah, I think it would be too headstrong to say, okay, if I'm elected, I'm going to change it back to the way it was before.
Okay.
Because then people who run for executive officer positions might not say, oh, well, I only asked for executive officer, I didn't ask for a specific role. So then it would depend on the nature of the officer themselves.
Okay. Well, I suppose with this theme of change, now I've asked this question of Henry as well, I committed to asking it to both of you. Again, given how late on we are and what is seen by some to be a terminal illness for the college, is there actually anything left that you can do which is making a substantive difference or improvement, or is it just the case that you're here to shepherd the last of us onto the last chopper out of cyber?
I wouldn't say we're shepherding people out, but I wouldn't say either that, you know, this, obviously we have precious time left, but I do think that those who think that, oh, there's not much left at Heathrow for me, there's only a few time left, I do think that if we are the people I like to think we are, the calibre of student I think we are, then we can identify with the college and think, okay, what's best next year in terms of us, because the changes will become more concrete, things will change.
It just seems that the point being, though, and I think this is almost implicit in everyone's manifestos. In fact, in an earlier interview today, Stefan essentially came out and said it outright. In fact, he accused some people, without mentioning any names, I don't think he mentioned any names, of promising things that they can't deliver. Actually, I think that's unfair, because I don't think anybody's really promised anything. I mean, if we're talking about new ideas, and I appreciate that it's difficult to have new ideas because we have such a short time. Again, trawling through your manifesto, I haven't seen a great deal. I mean, we've got the President's Question Time, for example, which stands out. It's not because it's a new idea, but at least because it's something that doesn't currently happen. There is, I would contend, a reason it doesn't currently happen, which is that when it's been tried before, it hasn't worked.
Yes. Which is why...
And it's questionable work.
Yeah, which is the idea that it's not yet a concrete idea, it's a concept.
Well, it was a concrete idea, I mean, it just didn't work. It has been tried before.
Yes, it's a malleable idea in that I will, as I've said, my entire manifesto is directed, so rather than this is what I'm going to do, it's this is what I'm going to do. Happening. This is what I'm going to do, and I want to know what you think about it.
Right.
So when I offer the President's Question Time, it doesn't have to be me sitting in the Loyola Hall waiting for people to turn up.
It does rather beg the question, though. I mean, you're not therefore running on a platform. I mean, anybody could do that. Anybody could stand up and say, "I'm just going to be here to listen to you."
Yes, and then the President becomes nothing more than a mouthpiece, affecting views upwards. Which is why I said explicitly in the hustings yesterday that to stop that from happening, I do have ideas regarding the future of the college. I think the Roehampton Partnership is a viable option, and it's one the college should explore. But I also feel it's one the students should have more of a hand in dictating.
Would you call for another referendum?
I think that I'd have to judge that on whether the students feel the need for one. If everyone's happy with the way things are going, which I myself, I like the direction which the college is heading, but I don't like the fact that the students don't necessarily have as much as a say in it.
Okay.
So I think a referendum which carries much more weight than a survey, for example, would be quite headstrong at the start of the year. But if we did surveys or we asked...
canvassing opinion beforehand to see whether
there's need for a referendum.
Is it really the case that anything could be achieved, whether or not you're happy with Roehampton as the future of the college? It sounds like you have some misgivings, but you are, broadly speaking, happy with it. I'm
happy that Heathrow does have a future. I think that as I understand Heathrow, I don't like to entertain the idea of a closure.
No.
Because a closure...
But given that we only have a year left before we have to move on, is there anything you can... There's no time, surely, to change it, whether the students want to or not.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the points of my manifesto, is making sure that we identify with the college and understand where we're going. However, an important part of that is as those structural changes happen, which are important, and which I will take petitions on, which will be informed by the students through referendums and surveys and so on, it's also important that as those changes go on, we don't ignore the effect and impact that can have on the students' experience. So certain things that might come about as a result of the changing nature of the college may impact the student experience negatively or positively, and it will be my job to find myself in the situations where there are decisions needed, and those will be informed by my understanding of the student.
Again, I mean, that does sound very... I mean, this is a point that's been raised before. It does simply sound like an extension of the job description. I mean, it's fine. You can run for president and say you're going to listen to the people who vote for you. No, I mean, surely we should just expect that of anybody running for president. It's not anything again, that stands out as being unique to you? It's not anything that nobody else can do. It's not anything that really uses what experience you have in academic affairs, which is again something we'll come on to. I mean, in your manifesto, I mean, under the student representation, there are things like, I'll endeavour to maintain an active social media presence, and I might be being unkind, but you're essentially promising to be on Facebook. Do you have any ideas, really, now? Is there room for any ideas left?
In terms of whether there is room for any ideas, I think that we have to realise that, as you say, we have little time left, and time for new initiatives regarding how to save Heathrow. Short of winning the lottery, there are a few ideas in which we can...
I'm going to now again ask you another question, which I said I'd ask both. We had a question at Hustings yesterday, trying to get people to be nice to each other, by asking you what you liked about your opponent, so I'm going to do it the other way around. Why you and not Henry? I mean, what do you have that he does not? Why are you a better choice?
I believe that, having looked at Henry's manifesto and having understood his position, as far as I'm aware, he's very societies and events orientated, which I don't deny are important parts of the student experience. However, something which I did highlight yesterday in my speech and is covered in my manifesto, that's one level at which the student experience happens. The other levels are areas such as the academic quality of the college, the academic quality of the students' individual degrees. They're feeling supported by the union, they're feeling comfortable with the union.
I mean, they are specifically mentioned in his manifesto, the pledge to maintain teaching standards, for example. Now, again, I will ask you what I asked him. Actually, how much control can you possibly have over that? I mean, again, as I pointed out to him, you can't stop staff going on sabbatical.
No, we can't, and I do understand that, but it's important that when those decisions are made, it is important that we remind the college and we say to them, we need to make sure that this time we do have left, which is, as you said, short, the focus is to make sure the students, they were promised at London University on a degree, which...
I don't think that's a question, though, is it?
However, it's the quality of the degree in which they're receiving. If they don't feel that, oh, this isn't worth my money, then that's a problem that the union will have to deal with.
Yes.
So I think it would be important for the student president, for the vice president, for the union as a whole, to say to the students, if anything does happen, we will be there. I'm actually meeting with Father Holman tomorrow to secure a commitment from him, hopefully, saying that if things do happen, which will impact the degree that the students are receiving, then they will offer the counselling and support that the students want and need. So support from the
to put you back to the question that started this off there, I mean, we've established actually that both you and your opponent have a pledge in your manifestos to maintain what we currently have. I mean, that's nothing new or unique to you. So to put the question again, what is it about you that makes you a better fit for the role?
I think it's my emphasis and focus on the overarching question of, and focus on the representation, the views in the correct forum. So while events and societies are an important part, above that is the academic quality in terms of importance. And then both of those come under the terms of, without accurate student representation at the decision-making levels of the college, without understanding the student views and taking stances in which, for example, the governing body meetings where these things get finalised, without being aware of the students' position and views, making those decisions and actually contributing to the discussion of whether these ideas should be passed.
Do you think actually you're almost running a more difficult campaign by having this focus on what to many is a fairly aloof matter?
I do think it's more difficult, and I think I'm counting on people to recognise that next year is not the time to be distant, not time to be apathetic regarding the status of the union of the college. Next year is the time to be more engaged than ever, to make use of the time we have left. But I believe that the most important issue, which will then trickle down into every other issue, including societies and events, is making sure that at the decision-making level of the college, those decisions are directly informed by the students' views, because at the end of the day, the students and the degrees are what the president's there to protect.
Of course. I mean, again, acknowledging though that societies and events are important to people to have anything resembling a social life, however difficult workload might make it. Your opponent has quite a wealth of experience in that field, having already arranged a lot of intercollegiate events, albeit in a niche society. And you also make that pledge in your manifesto that you will look to embrace more intercollegiate students. I wonder how you plan to go about it.
Yes, Topsy recently announced, I'll get the correct numbers this time, I believe it was £2,400 allocated to allowing students to go to other institutions such as Student Central or Imperial College to take part in the societies there. So I think that while the societies we have here will be pursued and maintained, I think that my experience...
Can you give us a quick example as we're running out?
Yeah, for example, the Fencing Society, which I made links at the beginning of this year, they're very active, but of course it's quite an expensive endeavour. So the college are fronting the student the money to be able to go and do those things, which we not necessarily be able to offer as the small Heathrow college that we are, will widen the net in terms of societies. But of course that's something that the college has to understand and be communicated to as an example.
Of course, as well. There are other things as well in the manifesto regarding the student experience. So you give them the opportunity to attend conferences and discussions, and presumably set aside funding for that. I understood that was already a thing.
Yes, that's what I was saying. I don't deny that. I didn't say it was my idea. I said to continue and extend and push. Well, if it succeeds, then of course there will be more. But of course, if it doesn't succeed, then that's money being funneled into something that students aren't wanting. So that's where my ideas for sitting down, talking to students, having the social media presence, welcoming challenges and criticism and concerns, so I can communicate to them.
On funding, perhaps we should maybe give you the benefit of the doubt and say that it was a joke when you approached a member of our editorial team and promised a bigger budget in exchange for a vote, or is that it was a joke, and that's always the special sale of indulgences open to everyone?
Of course it was. I would hope that the students would vote for who they think would do the best job for what they believe would be the most important aspect of the college next year, not who offered them the biggest budget.
Fair enough. Can I have a time check? Apologies if you've noticed any change in the picture quality. We've had some technical difficulties with our fantastic equipment. Picking up from where I hope we left off, there have been some questions submitted from other students, which I will put to you if that's okay. So the first one, which I believe was written specifically for you, other than being a mouthpiece, what would you actively do as president, I suppose, going back to the idea of unique ideas?
Yes. One of my ideas, which I believe is in my manifesto, is offering postgraduate students the opportunity to present some of their work to undergraduates and fellow postgraduates. The idea being that for the undergraduates, if they are looking to do a dissertation in that area, or just out of genuine interest, then that's information from someone closer in their age range than maybe some of the lecturers. And for the postgraduate students, if they are looking to pursue an idea or career in academia or teaching, that's valuable experience in terms of communicating to a large group of people. Something else I'll be talking to Father Holman about, and Catherine Powell tomorrow morning. As well as that, while the President does not have such a big hand in the events organisation, in terms of what the plans will be for next year's Freshers' Week, as it will be, I want to make sure that we have something to remember. So some of my ideas, which are again open to challenge and change.
Well, we may stray slightly from the preset questions, just to pick up on something you said. I mean, you said that you won't have an overly hands-on role in events organisation.
That would, of course, depend on the executive officers.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yes.
What would you do if you found yourself with a kind of a cripplingly small union, where you would have to do the vast majority of work that should be handled by a number of other people? Is there any way you can get around that?
I think that would rely on what I believed was the most important things that the President could do. So if I had a choice between making a poster for the latest union event or going to a governing body meeting at which certain key things would be decided, then obviously the priority would lie with the governing body meeting. However, as it came up yesterday in the hustings, obviously this job cannot be contained to the 70 hours a week that it will be contracted to do. So regarding things like events planning, if it came to pass that the executive officers were cripplingly small, then I would take as responsibility as I could manage, as well as the vital things that I believe the President does.
And going back on the postgrad idea that you brought up, aside from the Heathrow postgrads are quite notorious for their elusivity. This sounds like something which is kind of actionable over a longer term than we have left at this site, which leads me on to ask, I suppose, what your vision is for future planning, for the planning for Heathrop's afterlife, which will be an important part, presumably, of the President's job this year.
Yes.
How do you view your role in that?
I think the President has quite a formative role in that. I think, on the one hand, the President is a sort of mouthpiece in terms of understanding the students' views and communicating them, but my views are that the President will listen to the views of the students and then use them as a foundation and incorporate that with information that the President gleans from other meetings and boards to form a position regarding where the students should go. So in terms of what I would like to see come out, I would like to see Heathrop maintain some of its academic integrity insofar as remaining true to its philosophical and theological traditions, which I don't doubt it will. But in terms of going to Roehampton, I think the nature of that relationship needs to come to much more clear terms in terms of will we simply be the philosophy department, will we be a different college within it that is supported administratively by Roehampton. So I would like to see Heathrop, obviously if in a perfect world, continue as it is, but back to reality, I'd like to see it maintain a sort of mostly independent in terms of the way it conducts its teaching and conducts itself.
In terms of, though, things like societies or kind of the long-standing Heathropian traditions, I don't want to say the Lion, but I will.
Donkey Club.
And of course the Donkey Club, of course. I mean, do you see your role as also including an attempt, at least, to make a transition for those societies and clubs to keep for whoever is here in the future?
It would be difficult because the student carryover from here to Roehampton, if that's where we go, which I hope we do, would be rather small in that it would be
probably just postgraduates
or BD students. So continuing on the traditions would be difficult, but as I said in my speech, this is a closing of a chapter in Heathrop's history. So we have to leave room for new traditions as well.
I suppose so. Relics of the past.
Relics of the past. We can commit ourselves to the history books.
Yes.
But yeah, next year I want to make sure that Heathrop doesn't just peter out. I want to make sure that the time we have left is spent as well and as full as we can. So that comes to asking students what they want and making sure that the final year is very much their year. I think this was my primary focus on drafting the manifesto, was I wanted to make sure that we didn't just rattle off events hoping that something would stick. I wanted to make sure that we offer a quality event that people wanted to see and giving them a final year they deserve.
As we're drawing to a close, again, another question I put to your opponent, and in the interest of maintaining the student experience, can you pledge to set aside a specific fund to make sure that there are always working pool cues?
I believe
and will you resign if they aren't?
I believe I was asked at Hustings, can you commit to a new pool table? So of course, if I said no, then I'd be run contrary to my position of I would hope to be able to deliver what the students want. So while we do have time left, I do want, as I said, want to make sure this time is spent to the fullest.
Yes.
So if the students,
yes?
if the students tell me they would like a new pool table, that is definitely something that I will pursue wholeheartedly.
Not yet with the cues, but a whole table.
If students want pool cues, that's something I will pursue wholeheartedly. If it's what the students want, because I believe that the President's role this next year will be to make sure that the college and the union work with the students, not for, but with the students, to deliver a student experience they deserve. If that comes down to new pool cues, then I think we can find a way.
Fair enough. I believe that is all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us, and good luck in the election.
Thank you very much.